Hello everybody. Okay, in this video today we're going to talk about satellite communications and with an emphasis on ground stations. So let's get started. So the overall or the big picture is that we have a satellite up here. And on this satellite is a transmitter, and of course it's going to transmit toward the ground some data. Now on the ground, and we do this for an antenna, and on the ground we have an antenna that points at the satellite, hopefully. And out of that, we feed the antenna into a radio. Okay, and out of the radio comes the data, and we send this to a very special box called a terminal node controller, or we abbreviate that as a TNC. And we'll talk about what that does in just a minute. And then the next thing we do is we send this to the PC. But in order to hook it to the PC, there's an embedded thing in the PC called a COM port. And we will talk about that. So let's kind of label all this up. This is the PC. I'm struggling to draw, and this is a COM port. Now let's back up and kind of talk about each of these little pieces. Well, in here, this satellite has got information, and it's going to send it to us. And of course, this is referenced the low speed modem. Alright, so this satellite is going to be collecting data like its temperature and its current battery voltage and battery current and a lot of other things, and we're actually going to want to tell the satellite to do something. So it's going to send data. Now the way it sends data is, remember that the computers only know ones and zeros. So when the satellite wants to send a 1, it will essentially broadcast a tone of 1200 hertz. And if it wants to send a 0, it will put a tone out of 2200 hertz. And you can actually hear this with your ear. So the radio broadcasts these audio tones, audible tones at that radio frequency, and when we get out of that right here, we can hear that. Now the PC, it only understands ones and zeros, so we have to turn these tones back into ones and zeros, and that's the function of this thing called a terminal node controller. So we put tones in this direction, and out over here comes data. And by inference is that this is both bidirectional. In other words, data flows in this way and flows this way. So now let's talk a little bit about this COM port. You know, computers are pretty ignorant devices, and you got to tell it where the data comes in and where the data comes out. Well, one of the ways we do this is through a COM port. And almost in any language we pick, the syntax is we got to initialize the COM port. And we initialize COM ports by an open statement. So it'll be open. And usually it's COM, and then we give it a number. And these numbers can go from 1 to 20 something. And typically in our deal is this will be command COM number 1, port number 1, and then we got to tell it some characteristics. And typically the data rate at which we transfer data from here to here is 9600, but it could be many other. So we put 9600, and then we tell it how many bits it sends, and then we tell it how many stop bits we send, and how much parity. And from from language to language, these things will kind of vary, and you gotta, when you pick the language in the computer, you look these things up, and there's some other parameters we can send in here. Now, if you want to send something out on the file, out on the PC, you will do something like print comport 1, and then you'll give it a list of variables. And once you pick the specific language, we will get the syntax correct. So now let's kind of back up and review a little bit. Is that basically we have a satellite that's going to transmit toward the ground, and it's going to transmit tones. And these tones, for the low-speed modem only, are 1200 and 2200. The radio receives these tones and then sends it to this thing, which converts the tones from here to data. And we hook this to our PC, to a plug on the PC, and it's a COM port. And all this connection is serial connections. And there's one thing sort of special about TNC. It uses a protocol called AX25, and there will be future videos on AX25, and I'm going to write that down. But there's a lot of data on the web that explains that, and it's kind of like riding a bike. You gotta jump in and fall off a little bit before you figure it out. But the protocol is AX.25. So if you Google that, Mr. Google will tell you all about that. And this TNC, you can Google TNC. There's a lot on the web. We're going to run this thing in something called the KISS mode. And you can Google that, and we will try to handle this in future videos. So long for today.